Some people think ruining everyone else's night is funny, until someone flips the script on them. Last year, my friends and I were enjoying a peaceful night of live Irish folk music in a small pub, until a group of loud, drunk hecklers walked in and destroyed the entire atmosphere. But when one of them decided to jump on stage and sing herself, that's when I made sure she experienced exactly what she had been doing to everyone else all night. If you enjoy stories where karma hits right when it should, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments if you've ever seen someone get a perfect taste of their own medicine. All right, let's get into the story. It happened about a year ago, a couple days after St. Patrick's Day. Now, if you've ever been to an Irish pub around that time of year, you know the vibe. There's usually a mix of people. Locals relaxing after work, music lovers who came specifically for the folk songs, and the occasional group just looking to drink. But this place was special. It had two rooms. One was the typical bar room where people stood around drinking. The other was a quieter side room filled with small wooden tables where musicians would perform traditional Irish and Celtic folk songs. That's where my friends and I were sitting. The room wasn't crowded when we arrived. Maybe 5 or 6 tables were occupied. Dim yellow lights hung over the wooden beams, and there was that cozy smell of beer, old wood, and fried food in the air. On the small stage, 2 musicians were already playing. One had a fiddle, the other had an acoustic guitar, and they were good. Not the flashy, showy kind of good, the kind that pulls you into the music slowly, the kind that makes you lean back in your chair and just enjoy the moment. People were chatting quietly between songs, clapping politely when they finished. It was a perfect night. For about 20 minutes. Then they arrived. 4 tables worth of people came in at once. You know the type immediately. Loud, already drunk, talking over each other, laughing at maximum volume before they'd even sat down. At first, I tried to ignore it. They pushed a few tables together so they could sit as one massive group. Chairs scraped loudly across the floor. Glasses clinked. Someone shouted across the room for another round before the server even got to the table. The musicians kept playing, and for a moment it seemed like maybe the group would settle down. But they didn't. At first, the interruptions were small. Someone shouted, "Play something we know," in the middle of a song. Another yelled something sarcastic like, "That was depressing." Then they started talking loudly to each other while the musicians were performing. And I don't mean quiet conversation, I mean full volume shouting. One guy would yell a joke across the table. Half the group would burst into laughter. Another person would start heckling the stage. "Come on, pick it up, that's too slow." Every time the musicians started a song, they'd interrupt with comments. And the worst part? They weren't even trying to be malicious. They were just drunk, loud, and completely unaware that they were ruining the experience for everyone else in the room. My friends and I exchanged glances. You know that look you give when you're silently asking, is it just me or are these people completely unbearable? The musicians, to their credit, stayed professional. They'd smile politely, ignore the comments, and keep playing, which made it even worse. Because the rest of us were trying to listen, but it was impossible. Every beautiful melody was drowned out by someone shouting across the room. At one point, during a particularly quiet ballad, someone at their table yelled something like, "This one needs bagpipes," and the whole group erupted in laughter. I could feel my jaw tightening. My fingers were tapping on the table. That slow, simmering frustration started building. Not just because they were loud, but because they had completely taken over the room. What was supposed to be a relaxed night of music had turned into their personal drunken party, and no one was doing anything about it. Then something happened that made it even worse. One of the women in their group suddenly stood up. She was clearly drunk, but in that overly confident way alcohol sometimes gives people. She walked right up to the stage and loudly announced, "I'm going to sing an Irish folk song." Her friends cheered like she had just volunteered for a talent show. Now, to the musicians' credit, they handled it gracefully. One of them smiled and said something like, "Well, all right then, what song?" She named a well-known Irish folk tune, And surprisingly, she could actually sing. The musicians nodded and started playing the opening chords, and suddenly, her entire group went quiet, completely silent. They leaned forward to listen to their friend perform. That's when it hit me, that little moment of hypocrisy. They had spent the entire night yelling, laughing, heckling, and ruining the music, but the second their friend was performing, now everyone had to be quiet. Now everyone had to listen respectfully. And something inside me snapped. I leaned toward my friends and quietly said, "Watch this." The woman on stage began singing, and honestly, she was good. Clear voice, good pitch. The room actually started to settle into the song. But right as she hit the second verse, I started talking loudly to my friends. Not normal talking, rowdy talking, loud enough that everyone could hear. I interrupted the song mid-line with exaggerated comments. "Hey, can you hear this?" Then I laughed loudly. My friends caught on almost immediately. One of them burst into over-the-top laughter. Another started making sarcastic commentary. "Hey, play something faster!" Someone at our table clapped loudly in the middle of a verse, just like the rowdy group had been doing all night. The singer stumbled slightly for a moment, trying to push through the noise, and that's when the glares started. One of the guys from the heckler table turned towards us with an angry look. Another leaned over and whispered something to his friends. Their expressions shifted from smug amusement to irritation to annoyance. Finally, one of them glared directly at me, and that's when I locked eyes with him. I raised my voice just enough for the whole table to hear, and I said, "Sucks, doesn't it?" I paused just long enough for the silence to land. "When you can't hear the music because of some loud-mouthed asshole." The message hit instantly. You could see it in their faces, that realization, that uncomfortable moment where someone holds a mirror up to your own behavior. A couple of them looked embarrassed, others looked angry, but none of them said anything because they knew exactly what I meant. The woman finished the song, although now the mood in the room had completely shifted. Polite applause followed, but the energy was tense. My friends leaned toward me. One of them whispered, "Okay, that was hilarious, but we might want to leave." Because at this point, it was pretty clear the rowdy group was not thrilled with us. And honestly, they outnumbered us quite a lot. So we finished our drinks quickly, stood up, and made our way towards the door. As we walked past their table, a few of them stared daggers at us, but no one said a word. And the best part? For the rest of the time we were leaving, they were completely silent. No shouting, no heckling, no interruptions. Just quiet. Like they suddenly remembered how to behave in a room where people were trying to enjoy music. We stepped out into the cool night air. My friends started laughing immediately. One of them slapped me on the shoulder and said, "That was the most passive-aggressive revenge I've ever seen." Maybe, but honestly, it felt good. Not because I embarrassed them, but because for one brief moment they finally understood what it felt like. Sometimes revenge doesn't need to be elaborate. It doesn't need a grand scheme or a master plan. Sometimes the most satisfying form of justice is simply holding a mirror and letting people experience their own behavior. And in that Irish pub that night, for just one song, the hecklers finally heard exactly what everyone else had been hearing all night. Funny thing about people who ruin things for everyone else. They usually hate it the most when the same thing happens to them. And sometimes that's the only lesson they understand. So what do you think? Was that fair revenge, or should I have just ignored them? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where karma hits right when it should, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the next revenge story on screen. Trust me, the next one might be even crazier.